In the dust-choked territory of 1887, a man named Elias made a choice that broke every rule of the frontier. With his boots cracked, his belly empty, and his last silver coin gone, he led his only horse to the crossroads, and he traded him, not for gold, not for supplies, for a faded, threadbare Navajo rug. The townsfolk called him a broken fool. The drunks howled from the porch, but Elias didn't bargain for warmth. He bargained for a buried promise. 3 years later, when a stranger in a black duster rode into town, that same woven thread would unravel a debt older than the mountains. What would you do when your word demands everything you have left? Lock in, because this isn't just a story of the West, it's a reckoning. The mare's ribs showed through her sweat-matted coat as Elias pulled her to a hard stop. Hooves skidded on sun-baked hardpan, dust choked the air, thick as ground glass. At the crossroads, a man sat slumped against a split cedar post. Navajo, blanket draped like a burial shroud, breath shallow, eyes locked on the distant ridge. Elias dismounted. His cracked boots met the dirt with a dull thud. He unslung his canteen and offered it. The stranger's hands trembled. They pushed the tin away. Then the rider reached into the heavy folds of his wool and pulled out a tight roll of woven cloth. Faded, threadbare, stained with dried earth and old copper, he held it out toward Elias' horse. A silent trade. Elias knew exactly what his last horse meant: fresh water, dry firewood. A reliable path out of this dying valley. He knew what the settlement would say. They already called him a ghost haunting his own life, a man surviving too long on quiet grief and empty pockets. He had spent 3 years building a life where no one expected anything from him. That comfort was a fragile thing. He looked at the mare. She blew grit from her nostrils and waited. He looked at the rug. The rider's fingers whitened around the woven edge. A single word slipped through cracked lips. Then another. The rhythm carried weight, not a plea, a ledger. Elias took the cloth. It felt unnervingly heavy, denser than raw wool should ever be. He unrolled it halfway across his saddle horn. The weave tightened into sharp, deliberate lines, blood red, charcoal black, stark white, not decoration. Markers, every knot held the weight of a name, a map stitched in silence. He traced a raised thread with a calloused thumb. The pattern matched the old scout warnings he'd carried since the war, a blood oath, a guarantee of safe passage for families pushed from their valleys by railroad surveyors and hired rifles. The rider closed his eyes. The trade was settled. The stranger mounted the mare without a backward glance. He rode east toward the canyon mouth, leaving only fading tracks in the dust. Elias stood alone at the crossroads. The heavy bundle rested against his chest. By sundown, the town had already turned. Men on the saloon porch laughed until it broke into coughing fits. The marshal spat dark tobacco and told him to bury his foolishness before it buried them all. Elias offered no reply. He carried the bundle to his lean-to and laid it on a rough pine crate. He refused to strike a match. He simply sat in the gathering dark. The silence pressed against the walls. The town wanted him to stay small. The frontier demanded he stay quiet, but the weave spoke louder than both. He knew exactly what it demanded: safe passage for strangers, or survival for one man. The evening wind shifted across the flatlands. It carried the sharp scent of dry sage and distant wood smoke. Beyond the ridge, people were moving. Ahead, armed men were gathering. Elias pressed his palm flat against the rug. The rough threads bit into his skin. A promise is a heavy anchor. He pulled his coat tight, and he began to trace the route. The morning brought no relief. It brought boots on gravel, heavy, measured. Elias sat on the edge of his cot, the rug folded tight beside him, listening to the approach. 3 men, maybe 4, The sound stopped at his door. No knock, just the slow creak of timber as the frame gave way under a heavy shoulder. Marshal Vance stepped inside, hat brim low, duster dusted with trail powder. Behind him, two men in pressed wool suits and city shoes, investors, railroad surveyors. They smelled of cheap cologne and hard money. Vance didn't waste words. He looked at the bundle, then at Elias. "You hand it over, today." His voice carried the flat tone of a man who'd already decided the outcome. Elias stood, his joints protested. He kept his hands loose at his sides. "It isn't yours to take." One of the investors stepped forward, clean-shaven, eyes calculating. "We aren't asking for a gift, Mr. Thorne. We're offering a fair exchange, 200 silver, a plot near the creek, enough to buy a fresh mount and never look at this dust again." Elias didn't blink. He remembered the weight of the weave, the raised threads, the names stitched in silence. He remembered the rider's cracked lips. The quiet exchange at the crossroads. It's a marker for passage. Vance's jaw tightened. It's a death warrant. The Navajo bands are scattered, broken, but the men hunting them, they're organized. They carry repeaters. They don't ask questions. If they see that weave on a white man's back, they'll burn this valley to the bedrock looking for it. The investor adjusted his vest. "Take the coin. Let them sort it out. We bring order to this territory. You help us, you eat. You refuse, you starve, or worse." Elias walked to the wash basin, poured water, washed his face. The cold shock cleared his head. He looked at his reflection in the cracked glass, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too many men break under pressure. He turned back. "I gave my word." Vance stepped closer. "A word to a dying stray. Keep your honor, Elias, but don't expect us to bleed for it. If that rug stays here, this town washes its hands of you." The investor laid a heavy leather pouch on the crate. The coins clinked. A heavy, tempting sound. Walk away from the crossroads, walk away from the promise, or stay buried with it. Elias didn't touch the pouch. He picked up the rug, folded it once more, secured it against his chest with a wide canvas strap. The weight settled over his ribs. Familiar, anchoring. "You keep your money, I'll keep my word." Vance's hand drifted near his holster, not drawing, just measuring. "You just made yourself a ghost in this territory, Thorne. Good luck finding your way out of the canyon when the rifles start talking." They left. The door shut. The silence returned, heavier than before. Elias checked his revolver. Oiled, loaded. He packed dried beef, a canteen, flint, and a spare coil of rope. He moved through the lean-to with practiced efficiency. Every item had a place. Every movement carried purpose. He stepped outside. The sun beat down on the hardpan. A few faces watched from porch shadows. None spoke. The marshal's warning had already spread. He was marked not by law, by choice. He walked to the hitching post. The mare was gone, traded for the weave. He adjusted the strap, felt the rough edges dig into his shoulder. He began walking east toward the canyon mouth. The dust swallowed his boots. The town faded behind him. The real weight wasn't the wool, it was the promise, and promises in the West don't bend. They break men or they break ground. He kept walking. The heat climbed. The sky bleached white. The first warning came as a scent on the wind. Wood smoke, not hearth smoke, wildfire or burned shelter. He paused, listened. Nothing but the dry rattle of sage and the distant cry of a hawk. He moved faster. The trail markers were subtle. A stone stacked just so. A stripped branch pointing downward. A scrape on a limestone face. He read them like letters. They led into the throat of the canyon. Narrow walls rose on either side. Shadow deepened. The air cooled. The sound of his own breathing grew loud. He checked the rifle, chambered a round. The canopy of cottonwoods overhead blocked the sun. It felt like stepping into a held breath. The ground showed signs of recent travel. Too many boots, too many horses, not moving carefully, moving with purpose and with violence. A snapped fence post lay across the trail, splintered. Not by wind, by boot, or by rope, he stepped over it. The rug shifted against his back. He felt the raised pattern through his shirt, a reminder, a compass. He pressed deeper. The canyon narrowed further. The walls closed in like a vice. Then he saw it, a campsite, or what was left of one, ashes. Cold, a charred cooking pot. A torn canvas scrap caught on mesquite thorns. He knelt, pressed fingers to the ground, still damp beneath the crust. Recent, within the day, he scanned the ridge. Nothing moved, but the silence felt wrong. Watched, he stood, kept low. The rug's weight pulled him forward. He followed the broken trail. The markers grew erratic, panicked. The families had been moving fast, running, not traveling. He found the first body before he found the water. A young boy. Face turned away, blanket pulled over his shoulders, no sign of struggle, just sudden stillness. Elias knelt, checked the pulse. Gone, hours, maybe a day. He pulled the blanket back gently, revealed a woven band on the boy's arm, matching the rug's pattern, a clan marker, a sign of belonging. He closed the boy's eyes, stood. The guilt settled like lead in his gut. He was too late to save this one. He wouldn't be too late for the rest. He adjusted his grip on the rifle. The canyon echoed with a distant crack, not thunder, not a rockfall, a single rifle shot, muffled by stone, echoing back, then another. Closer, he dropped to a knee, listened. The wind shifted, carried the sharp tang of spent powder, and the low murmur of men, talking, planning. Moving with the confidence of hunters who already knew the prey was trapped, he checked the trail ahead. It split. One path led down toward a dry wash. The other climbed toward a narrow shelf. He traced the weave on his back, followed the raised threads in his mind. The markers pointed up, toward the shelf, toward cover. He moved, quiet. Deliberate, every step measured, every shadow assessed. The shots grew closer, the voices clearer. They were herding them, not chasing, herding like cattle toward a choke point, toward a kill box. Elias felt the old war tension coil in his chest, the familiar cold clarity. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a man keeping a word, but the word required him to become something dangerous again. He reached the shelf, peered over the edge. Below in the wash, shapes moved, dark coats, long rifles. Moving in a loose line, flanking, cutting off escape. Ahead, a small group of figures huddled near a rock overhang. Women, children, elders moving slowly, exhausted, trapped. The men below had them pinned, waiting for the sun to dip, waiting for dark. Or waiting for the shot that would start the slaughter. Elias unslung the rug, laid it flat on the stone, studied the pattern one last time. The lines converged on a single point, a narrow gap in the rock wall ahead, a hidden pass. If he could draw the hunters toward him, the families could slip through the gap. It would mean stepping into the line of fire. It would mean revealing himself. It would mean breaking the quiet life he'd fought so hard to keep. He looked at the group below, looked at the hunters. Looked at the rifle in his hands. He didn't pray, he didn't hesitate. He stood, raised the rifle to his shoulder, took a breath. The first shot cracked across the canyon, not aimed at a man, aimed at the sky. A warning, a declaration. The hunters froze, turned, scanned the ridge. Elias lowered the rifle, slung it, grabbed the rug, and stepped onto the trail toward them. The wind howled through the stone, carrying the promise of lead. He walked into the open, let them see him, let them know what was coming. The debt was older than the mountains, but the reckoning was just beginning. The boots on the ridge didn't stop. They didn't falter. They carried forward with the steady rhythm of a man who had already paid the price for his choice. Elias moved through the narrow shelf, eyes locked on the dry wash below. The hunters below shifted their line, confused, searching the upper rock. The echo of his warning shot still hung in the thin canyon air. It bought time, not safety. Time is a fragile currency in hostile ground. He needed every second. The rug pressed against his back, heavy, unforgiving. He adjusted the canvas strap, felt the friction burn into his collar. Pain was familiar. Pain kept him sharp. Below, the dark-coated men began to fan out. 2 moved toward the base of the cliff. 3 kept their eyes on the trapped families. The leader, a tall man with a wide-brimmed hat and a repeater resting easy on his hip, raised a hand. The hunting party paused. They knew the terrain. They knew the advantage of the high ground. But they didn't know the man on the ridge. That ignorance would cost them. Elias dropped to a crouch, slid behind a limestone outcrop, unwrapped the rifle, checked the chamber. Brass gleamed in the pale light. He had 12 rounds, maybe 13, against an unknown number he didn't count. Counting breeds doubt. He focused on the gap, the narrow pass in the rock wall ahead of the trapped group. It was their only way out. It was his only leverage. He shifted his weight, peered over the edge. The leader was moving now, climbing, not rushing, calculated. He knew the ridge would force the runner into a dead end. He was hurting him just like the families. Elias let him climb, let him think he had the advantage, let him believe this was just another stray drawing fire. The gap below was closing, 200 yards, 150. The women and children pressed tighter against the overhang. An elder wrapped a shawl around a coughing girl. No one looked up. They had stopped hoping for rescue. They were bracing for the end. Elias felt the weight of that stillness. It settled in his chest, cold, heavy. He remembered the war, not the glory, the silence after the volleys, the dust, the broken men. He had sworn never to carry that kind of quiet again. But a promise is a heavier burden than a rifle. He took a breath, held it, released it slow. The leader's boots scraped stone. Closer, 50 yards from the ridge edge, 20, he stopped. Raised the repeater, scanned the rocks. Elias stayed low, kept his silhouette broken against the limestone. He waited. The leader called out, voice flat, carrying over the canyon. "Come out, I know you're there. Drop the bundle, walk away. You don't have to die for dead men's trails." Elias didn't answer. He shifted left, crawled along the narrow ledge. The stone cut into his palms. He didn't flinch. He kept moving. The leader turned, tracked the sound, fired. The round sparked off the rock 2 feet from Elias' head. Stone fragments rained down, dust plumed. Elias kept crawling, reached the higher vantage, looked down. The families were shifting. Sensing the change, the elder looked up, met Elias' gaze for a fraction of a second, recognition, then fear. Elias raised a hand, pointed to the gap, mouthed a single word, "Go." The elder hesitated, then nudged the group. They moved, slow, fragile, but moving. The leader saw it, swung the repeater down, fired again. The bullet tore through canvas. A woman gasped, dropped to her knees, not hit. The child she held was. Blood bloomed on pale wool. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was a breath, sharp, sudden, final. Elias didn't think, he acted. He rose, shouldered the rifle, fired. The leader's hat flew, his shoulder snapped back. He dropped the repeater, stumbled, didn't fall, cursed, grabbed the rifle with his left hand. The canyon erupted. Echoes bounced off stone. 3 more hunters below opened fire. Rounds cracked through the air, chipped rock, tore through sage. Elias dropped behind the outcrop, rolled, felt the heat of passing lead. He didn't check for wounds. He checked the gap. The families were slipping through, one by one. The elder brought up the rear, dragging the coughing girl, moving fast, too fast for broken legs, but fast enough. The leader was climbing again, bleeding, furious. He didn't care about pain. He cared about the prize. He reached the ridge edge, pulled himself up, saw Elias, raised the repeater. Elias fired. The round caught the leader's chest, threw him backward. He hit the stone, slid, stopped. The rifle clattered into the void. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind and the distant sound of retreating footsteps. Elias exhaled, long, slow. He stood, looked over the edge. The wash was clear. The hunters below were scattering, confused, leaderless. They wouldn't stay. They'd regroup, bring more. But the families were gone, hidden in the rock, safe. For now, Elias lowered the rifle, slung it. Walked to where the leader lay. Blood pooled in the limestone cracks. The man's eyes were open, staring at the sky, not at Elias. He was gone. Elias knelt, took the man's canteen, drank. The water was warm, tasted of iron. He stood, turned. The rug was still strapped to his back. Still heavy, still demanding. He hadn't finished. The gap was only the first step. The real test was ahead. He began to climb down toward the wash, toward the families, toward the debt he had chosen to carry. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the canyon floor. The air grew cold. The sound of distant hooves carried on the wind. More men, coming. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, kept moving. The word wasn't just a promise anymore, it was a path. And he would walk it until the ground gave out, or until he did. The descent was slow, deliberate, every step measured against the crumbling stone. The canyon walls narrowed further, closing like a throat. Elias moved through the shadows, boots finding purchase on slick shale and dry earth. He kept his head low. Scanned the ridge above, scanned the wash below. The scattered hunters hadn't returned, not yet, but the hoofbeats on the wind were closer. Steady, organized reinforcements, or a different faction, it didn't matter. The ground was turning hostile. He reached the bottom of the shelf, stepped into the dry wash. The air felt heavier here, damp, smelling of wet stone and old ash. He followed the trail, faint, trampled, but visible. The families had moved quickly, left no markers. Only the drag of small feet, the scuff of worn moccasins, the quiet desperation of people who knew the land would eat them if they stopped. Elias kept pace. The rug pressed into his back. The weave had soaked up sweat and dust. It felt heavier now, anchored to his spine, a physical reminder of the line he had crossed. He hadn't just chosen a side. He had chosen a responsibility. And responsibility in the West doesn't ask permission. It demands proof. He found the water before he found the camp, a seep in the limestone, clear, cold. He knelt, drank, washed the grit from his face, checked his hands, calloused, cut, shaking slightly, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the slow burn of a man pushing past his limits. He stood, followed the water's edge. The trail turned upward again. Into a narrow box canyon, walls rose sheer, sky narrowed to a slit of pale blue. The air grew still, watchful. He slowed, listened. A child's cough, muffled, faint, then the rustle of cloth, the soft scrape of stone. He stepped around the bend. The camp was small, hidden in the shadow of an overhanging ledge. Canvas stretched tight between rocks. A low fire burned in a pit, ashes white, heat gone. Figures sat in silence. Women, elders, children, all wrapped in shawls and blankets, all watching him. The elder stood first, a tall man with a face carved by wind and years, his eyes locked on the rug, on the raised threads, on the blood oath marker. He didn't speak, he simply nodded, a gesture heavy, final. Elias returned it. He unslung the bundle, laid it on the ground, unrolled it halfway. Revealed the full pattern, the clan lines, the markers of passage. The elder stepped forward, placed a hand on the weave, traced a raised thread. His fingers moved slowly, reverently. Then he looked up. You carry the thread, you keep the path. His voice was rough, grounded, carrying the weight of old mountains. I keep the word, Elias replied, simple, direct. The elder studied him, looked at his rifle, at his boots, at the dust on his coat, at the quiet stillness in his eyes. You trade your horse for wool, you walk into fire for us, you walk into fire for the promise, for the families, for the line. The elder's jaw tightened. He turned, looked at the group, spoke in low tones, words flowed soft, measured. The women nodded. The children stayed still. The camp shifted, not in panic, in preparation. They were moving again. Before dark, the elder turned back. The hunters return. They bring the iron men, the men with the loud rifles. They do not stop. Elias knew it. The iron men, the railroad enforcers, the investors hired muscle. They wouldn't let a displaced clan slip through their territory. Not when the valley was being cleared for track and timber, not when the investors had already bought the law. We move north, through the pass, beyond the stone teeth. The elder pointed toward the narrow gap at the back of the box canyon. The path is narrow, the rock is loose. The women cannot carry the heavy loads. The children cannot climb fast. Elias looked at the gap, looked at the group, looked at the sky. The light was fading. The shadows stretched long. The wind carried the first scent of night, cold, damp. Promising rain or snow, he didn't know. He only knew time was bleeding out. I'll hold the rear, he said. You take them through. I will watch the trail. The elder's eyes narrowed. You are one man, they are many. One man can hold a choke point if he knows the stone. If he knows the dark, I know both. The elder studied him, long, quiet, then he nodded. You hold the rear, we carry the weak. If you fall, the thread breaks. If the thread breaks, the line ends. It won't break. Elias turned, walked back toward the canyon mouth. The path he had just come down, the path the hunters would take. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He reached the narrowest point, a natural arch of limestone, barely wide enough for a single rider. He knelt, piled loose rock. Dragged deadfall, built a low barricade, not to stop bullets, to slow boots, to force them into a single line, to make every step count. He checked his ammunition, 9 rounds left. He laid them in a row on the stone, counted them again, didn't flinch. He sat against the barricade, rested the rifle across his knees, closed his eyes, listened. The wind howled through the stone, carried the distant sound of hooves, closer now, steady, confident. Men who believed they were hunting, not walking into a trap. Elias opened his eyes, watched the trail. The light died. The canyon filled with shadow. The first star appeared, pale, distant, cold. The hoofbeats grew louder. The murmur of voices, low, confident, unhurried. They were close. He stood, raised the rifle, shouldered it, took a breath. The first shadow appeared at the canyon mouth. A horse, then a man, then another, dark coats, wide hats, long rifles, moving slow, scanning. The leader at the front, not the man from the ridge, a new face. Older, scarred, calm. He stopped, looked at the barricade, looked at the arch. Looked at Elias. He didn't speak. He simply raised a hand. The hunters halted, fanned out, dismounted, moved on foot. The scarred man stepped forward, stopped 10 paces from the arch. He studied Elias, studied the rifle, studied the quiet stillness. You hold the back door, you think you can stop us. I don't think I can stop you. Elias replied, voice flat, grounded. I just think I can make you pay for every inch. The scarred man smiled, thin, cold. You're a white man. You don't bleed for savages. You trade with them. You take their coin, you don't take their burdens. I took the thread, I keep the path. The scarred man's smile faded. You're a ghost. You don't belong to them, you don't belong to us. You belong to nothing. I belong to my word. The scarred man stepped closer. 5 paces. You think honor feeds a man. You think promises stop bullets. They don't, but they tell a man where to stand. The scarred man's hand drifted to his holster. You stand in a dead place. You stand in a place where men like me win. Maybe, Elias said, but not today. The scarred man drew fast, clean, the rifle cracked. The round sparked off the stone beside Elias' head. Dust plumed. Elias didn't move, he waited. Let the man fire, let him commit. Let him think he had the upper hand. The scarred man fired again. The round tore through the barricade. Wood splintered, rock cracked. Elias raised his rifle, fired. The round caught the scarred man's shoulder, threw him backward. He dropped, cursed, rolled, fired again. The bullet grazed Elias' arm. Heat, blood. He didn't flinch, he fired again. The scarred man's rifle went silent. He lay still, breathing shallow. The hunters hesitated, confused, divided. Elias shifted his aim, swept the line. Drop your steel, walk away, or die on stone. His voice carried, clear, unshaken. The hunters looked at each other, looked at the scarred man, looked at the dark arch. One stepped back, dropped his rifle, then another, then a third. The rest followed. Steel hit stone, hands raised. The canyon filled with the sound of surrender, heavy, final. Elias lowered the rifle, didn't holster it, kept it ready. The men turned, walked back, left the scarred man lying in the dirt, left their horses, left their steel, left their pride. Elias watched them go, didn't celebrate, didn't relax. He knew what it meant. This wasn't over. This was a pause, a breath. The Iron Men would send more. They always sent more. He walked to the scarred man, knelt, checked the wound, bleeding, bad but not fatal. He took the man's canteen, drank, left it beside him. You'll live, he said. Tell them the thread holds. Tell them the path is closed. Tell them a white man keeps his word. The scarred man stared at him, eyes wide, breath ragged. You're a fool. You'll bleed out here. You'll die for nothing. I won't die for nothing. I'll die for the promise. He stood, turned, walked back to the arch, slung the rifle, checked the sky. The night had fully fallen, stars sharp, cold. The wind shifted, carried the sound of movement from deep in the canyon. The families moving through the pass, safe for now. He sat against the stone, rested his head, closed his eyes, listened. The hoofbeats were gone, the voices were gone. Only the wind remained, and the quiet weight of the rug, still heavy, still demanding, still true. He didn't sleep, he waited. The dawn would bring new trouble, the investors would bring new men, the law would bring new warrants, but the thread held, the path held, and the promise remained unbroken. He opened his eyes, watched the dark, prepared for the next test. The debt was older than the mountains, and he would carry it until the ground gave out. Or until he did. If you rode with me this far, you already know the price of a kept word. Elias held the stone against steel. He bought the families their passage. But a promise doesn't end when the shooting stops. It only deepens. Before the war chief steps from the shadows and forces a man to trade his rifle for the truth, take a breath to like and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me exactly where you're riding in from. I want to see how far this trail has reached across the map. Because the next test won't be won with lead. It will be decided by what a man is willing to lay down, and the canyon is holding its breath. The wind died. The dust settled like a slow breath. Elias stood at the narrow arch of limestone, rifle still resting across his knees, watching the retreating shadows of the hired men vanish into the wash. He did not lower his guard. He knew the canyon. He knew men who carried steel did not walk away from a wound without counting their losses and planning their return. He listened to the stone. It held the echo of boots. It held the weight of waiting. He shifted his shoulders. The canvas strap dug into his collarbone. The rug pressed against his spine, heavy, unmoving, a silent witness to the line he had drawn. He did not celebrate. He did not relax. He simply waited. The dark would bring them back, or it would bring someone else. They came from the East Ridge. Not with the heavy tread of hired guns, not with the restless energy of men chasing coin. They moved like water, quiet, deliberate, shadows separating from the rock, 6 figures, maybe 7, wraps and woven shawls blending with the canyon floor, moccasins silent on shale. They did not spread out, they did not rush. They formed a line, even, measured, unhurried. At the center walked a man older than the rest, tall, shoulders broad but worn, hair streaked with iron gray. Eyes that had watched seasons turn and valleys burn. He carried no rifle, only a long walking staff carved from juniper wood. The war chief. Elias knew the posture, he knew the stillness. He had seen it on the battlefield. It was the stance of a man who had already decided how the day would end. He simply had not told anyone yet. Elias did not reach for his weapon. He kept his hands loose. He let the rifle rest against the stone. He turned his body slowly, open, unthreatening. The chief stopped 10 paces from the arch. The line behind him halted. No words, no signals, just the wind moving through dry grass and the faint scent of wood smoke clinging to wool. The chief's gaze moved over Elias, past the dust on his coat, past the cuts on his hands, past the exhausted set of his shoulders. It landed on the bundle strapped to his back, on the faded edge of the weave peeking from the canvas. The chief's jaw tightened, just slightly, a flicker of recognition, then caution. He tapped his staff once against the stone. The sound was sharp, clear, a demand for attention, a demand for truth. You stand on the path. The chief's voice was low, rough, carrying the weight of dry earth and old rivers. You carry the thread. You stand in the place where men with iron come to kill. Who speaks for you? Elias met his eyes. He did not blink. He did not shift his weight. He kept his breathing slow. Even I speak for myself. The chief stepped closer, 5 paces. The staff rested at his side. You are not of the clan. You are not of the valley. You are a white man with a rifle and a heavy pack. You block the pass. You draw fire. Why? The question hung in the air. Simple, direct, unforgiving. It was not an accusation. It was a test, a weighing of intent. Elias felt the old instinct rise, the urge to explain, to justify, to list the reasons. He swallowed it down. Words were cheap on the frontier. Action was the only currency that held value. He kept his voice flat, grounded. I gave my word to carry the thread, to keep the path open, to hold the rear until the families passed. The chief studied him, long, quiet. The wind moved through the canyon, carried the sound of distant movement. Boots on stone, not the tribe, not yet. The hired men were regrouping, closing in. The chief did not look toward the wash. He kept his eyes on Elias. You stand for strangers. You stand against steel. You risk your breath for people who owe you nothing. Why? The question repeated. Heavier, deeper. It asked what kind of man would choose this ground, what kind of life had led him to this arch, what kind of ghost haunted his steps. Elias did not look away. He felt the weight of the past press against his ribs, not the war, not the names of fallen friends, the quieter failures, the moments he had walked away when he should have stood, the promises he had broken to survive. He had spent 3 years trying to bury them. The rug had dragged them back into the light. He would not bury them again because the word matters, because a promise is a line in the dirt. You cross it, you lose yourself. You keep it, you find it. Silence fell, thick, heavy. The chief's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, in assessment. He had heard men speak of honor before. He had watched them break it when the sun grew hot or the bullets flew. He had seen men trade their word for coin, for comfort, for an easy road home. He watched Elias' hands. They stayed loose. They did not tremble. They did not reach for steel. They rested at his sides, ready but not eager. The chief tapped the staff again, a different rhythm. Slower, he turned slightly, nodded toward the ridge. The shadows shifted. Another figure stepped forward, not from the wash, From the upper trail, a man in a dark coat dusted with grey powder, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a repeater slung across his chest. The mercenary captain, the man from the first ridge, the one Elias had wounded. The shoulder was bound tight, the arm rested against his ribs, but his eyes were clear, cold, calculating. He stopped beside the chief, not as an ally, as a claimant. He did not look at the tribe, he looked at Elias. You're a stubborn man, Thorn. Stubborn gets men killed out here. You think you're holding a pass, you're holding a grave. The chief did not move, he let the words hang. He watched Elias' face, watched for the flinch, watched for the anger, watched for the lie. Elias felt the cold air settle over his skin. He looked at the captain, looked at the rifle, looked at the chief. The triangle was complete, the tribe behind him, the hired steel to his right, the arch at his back. He was cornered, not by force, by choice. He had chosen to stand here. He had chosen to carry the weight. Now he had to pay for it. He did not step back. He did not raise his voice. He reached slowly toward his shoulder, unhooked the canvas strap, let the heavy bundle slide to the stone, unfolded it carefully, laid the rug flat on the dry earth. The pattern caught the fading light. Blood red, charcoal black, stark white, the clan markers, the oath lines, the proof of passage. Elias stepped away from it, placed his boots on the dirt, looked at the chief. I don't carry land deeds, I don't carry guilt, I carry a promise, that's all. He reached for his rifle, unslung it, held it by the barrel, laid it across the woven edge. The steel rested on the wool, a silent offering, a clear boundary. I am not here to buy, I am not here to take, I am here to hold. Until the road is clear, or until I am not. The captain's mouth tightened. He shifted his weight. His good hand hovered near his repeater. You think that wool stops a bullet. You think a word stops a man who wants what you're protecting. You're a fool. You'll bleed out here, and they won't even remember your name. Elias did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the chief. I know. The chief knelt, slow, deliberate. His knees cracked against the stone. He reached out, traced the raised threads. His fingers moved over the clan lines, over the blood oath markers, over the names stitched in silence. He did not speak. He simply felt the weight of the weave, felt the years, felt the loss, felt the promise. He looked up. His eyes were clear, heavy, unblinking. You lay down your steel, you show us the thread. You speak plain, but steel returns. Men return. The path ahead is broken. The iron men will not stop. They will bring fire. They will bring rope. They will burn the canyon to ash to get what they want. You stand in the center. You take the first shot. You take the last. Are you ready for that? The question was not a warning, it was a mirror. Elias felt the cold settle deeper. He knew the answer. He had known it since the crossroads, since the mare's breath faded, since the rider's cracked lips spoke a word he had no right to carry. I am ready. The chief stood. He tapped the staff once, a final sound, a marker. He stepped back, looked at his warriors, looked at the captain, looked at Elias. You hold the rear. We take the weak through the teeth of the rock. If you fall, the thread breaks. If the thread breaks, the line ends. We do not mourn broken threads. We weave new ones, but we do not forget the man who held it. Elias nodded. Simple, quiet, I will hold. The captain spat into the dust. He adjusted his coat, looked at the chief. You let him stand. You let him play here. He's one man, he's tired. He's bleeding, he's done. The chief did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the fading light, on the darkening ridge. On the first stars piercing the pale sky, you see a man, I see a word. Words do not blade, they do not tire, they wait. He turned, raised his hand. The warriors moved, not in panic, not in fear, in purpose. They slipped into the shadows, toward the narrow pass, toward the families, toward the dark. The captain watched them go. His jaw worked. He looked at Elias. You think you've won, you haven't. You've just bought them time. Time is a coin we spend fast. He turned, walked back toward the wash. His boots crunched on shale. He did not look back. He knew what he had to do. Elias knew it too. He picked up his rifle, checked the chamber. Counted the rounds, 7 left. He strapped the canvas back over his shoulders. The rug settled into place, heavier now, anchored. He walked back to the arch, sat against the stone, rested the rifle across his knees, closed his eyes, listened. The wind shifted, carried the sound of movement, not from the pass, from the ridge, from the wash, from every direction. Men were moving, steel was being checked, boots were being tied. The night was coming, and it would bring fire. He did not sleep, he watched. The dark fell like a heavy blanket. The stars multiplied, cold, distant, unblinking. The canyon filled with silence. Then the first sound returned, a match striking stone, a spark, a flame, then another, then another. Torches bloomed along the upper ridge, orange, flickering, casting long, jagged shadows against the limestone. The captain stood at the center of a group of 6 men, all armed, all rested, all waiting for his signal. They did not rush, they did not shout. They moved with the quiet confidence of men who had done this before. They fanned out, took positions on the high ground, looked down at the arch, at the lone figure sitting against the stone. The captain raised a hand. The torches stopped. The silence returned, thick, heavy, expectant. Elias opened his eyes, stood. Slung the rifle, checked his footing. The stone was cool beneath his boots. The air smelled of dry pine and spent powder. He did not speak. He did not move toward them. He simply stood at the narrowest point. The choke, the line. The place where men with steel would have to meet a man with nothing left to lose. The captain's voice carried over the canyon. Flat, clear, final, last chance, Thorn, step aside, walk into the dark. Let us clear the valley or stay and burn with it. Elias felt the weight of the rug against his spine, felt the raised threads pressing into his shirt, felt the quiet stillness in his chest. He raised his rifle, not to fire, to mark the line. He placed the barrel against the stone, looked up. I gave my word. The captain's jaw tightened. He raised his hand again. The torches flared. The boots moved forward, 6 men, descending the slope, steady, measured, unhurried. They knew the terrain. They knew the advantage. They knew what was coming. Elias adjusted his grip. Felt the familiar weight of the wood. Felt the cold metal of the trigger. Felt the slow beat of his heart. He did not pray. He did not hesitate. He stepped into the shadow of the arch. Let the dark take him. Let the stone hide him. Let the night do its work. The first boot hit the shale. The first breath echoed off the wall. The first shadow crossed the line. Elias raised the rifle, took a breath, and waited. The debt was older than the mountains, but the reckoning was just beginning. The shots did not come all at once. They came like rain on tin, sharp, sudden, scattered, then rhythmic, then heavy. Elias moved with the stone. He did not stand in the open. He used the arch, the limestone, the deadfall, the natural choke points. He fired once, twice. Let the echoes do the work. Let the confusion spread. The men on the ridge hesitated. The dark swallowed their aim. The wind scattered their shouts. He did not fire to kill. He fired to slow, to break the line, to force them into the narrow space where numbers meant nothing and positioning meant everything. A round sparked off the rock beside his head. Stone fragments rained down. He dropped, rolled, felt the heat of passing lead. He did not check for wounds. He checked the angle. He fired again. The man at the front stumbled. Dropped to one knee, cursed. The line faltered. The torches flickered. Shadows danced. Elias stood, fired again. The second man fell back. The torch dropped, rolled, caught dry grass. Flame bloomed, spread. The canyon filled with smoke. Thick, bitter, blinding. He coughed, wiped his eyes. Kept moving, kept firing, kept holding the line. The captain's voice cut through the smoke. Sharp, angry, push through. He's one man, he's out of rounds, he's done. Elias checked the cylinder. Empty. He dropped the rifle, drew the revolver, 4 rounds left. He did not count. He stepped into the smoke, into the heat, into the space between steel and stone. The first man emerged from the haze, repeater raised, eyes wide, breath ragged. Elias fired. The man dropped. The second appeared, faster. Angry, fired, wild. The round grazed Elias' shoulder. Heat, blood. He didn't flinch. He fired. The man fell. The third hesitated, looked at the fallen, looked at the smoke, looked at the dark, turned, ran. The fourth followed. The smoke swallowed them. The torches guttered. The canyon fell quiet again. Broken, heavy, smelling of ash and spent powder. Elias leaned against the stone, breathed slow, checked his hands, shaking, cut, bleeding. He pressed a rag to his shoulder. The pain was sharp, grounded, real. He looked down the arch. 3 men lay in the dust. One was breathing, barely. The others were gone. He did not feel victory. He felt the weight of what it cost. He walked to the edge, looked out over the wash. The hired men were gone, not dead, not defeated, just scattered. They would regroup. They would bring more, or they would send word to the investors, to the marshal, to the men who bought the law with silver and promises. He knew it. He had always known it. The thread held. The path was clear, but the road ahead was long. He sat against the limestone, closed his eyes. Listened to the wind. It carried the sound of retreating footsteps, of quiet voices, of a people moving through the dark. Safe, for now. He opened his eyes, looked at the sky. The stars were sharp, cold, unmoving. He felt the rug against his back, still heavy, still demanding, still true. He did not sleep. He waited. The dawn would bring new trouble. The valley would not stay quiet. The law would not forget his name. But the promise remained unbroken. He adjusted his coat, pressed the rag tighter to his wound, and watched the dark until the light returned. 3 years passed like dust in the wind, slow, relentless, unforgiving. The valley changed. The drought broke. Rain came, washed the hardpan, fed the dry creek beds, turned the dust to mud, then to grass, then to a fragile green. The town grew. Wooden porches expanded. Saloon windows caught the morning sun. New faces arrived, old faces left. The marshal retired. The investors moved their rails. The tracks cut through the valley like a scar. Silver and iron replaced dust and silence. But the land remembered, the rocks remembered, the canyon remembered, Elias remembered. He did not live in the lean-to anymore. He lived on the edge of the ridge. A small cabin built of pine and stone, a roof of tin, a hearth of river rock. A chair draped in faded wool. The rug, he kept it there, not as decoration, as a marker, a ledger, a quiet reminder of the line he had drawn. He worked the land, chopped wood, mended fences, kept to himself. The town spoke of him in low tones. Some called him a fool. Some called him a ghost. Some called him a man who kept his word. He did not answer any of them. He simply lived. He aged. The lines on his face deepened. The gray in his hair spread. The scar on his shoulder pulled in the cold. But his eyes stayed clear. His hands stayed steady. His breath stayed slow. He had learned the quiet truth of the frontier. Survival is not about winning. It is about enduring. It is about carrying the weight until the ground gives out, or until you do. He carried it every day. Every season, every year, until the dust settled, until the wind shifted, until the sound of hooves returned. They came at dawn, not a single rider, not a scattered patrol, a line, 10 men, maybe 12, wrapped in woven shawls, riding painted horses, carrying long rifles. Moving with the same quiet purpose as before, not as hunters, not as enemies, as a delegation, as a claim, At the center rode a figure in a black duster, tall, still, unhurried. The duster hid his face, it hid his posture, it hid everything but the slow, deliberate rhythm of his horse. Elias stood on the porch, watched them approach, did not reach for his rifle, did not step back, did not speak. He simply waited. The dust settled, the horses slowed, the line halted at the edge of the property. The figure in the black duster dismounted, stepped forward, removed the duster hood. The face was older, leaner, carved by wind and years, but the eyes were the same. The rider, the man from the crossroads, the man who had traded his last breath for a promise. He stood in the yard, looked at the cabin, looked at the chair, looked at the rug draped over the wood. He did not smile, he did not speak, he simply nodded. Elias returned it, a gesture heavy, final. The rider turned, raised his hand. Two warriors stepped forward, leading a third man, bound, hands tied behind his back, face bruised, coat torn, eyes wide, desperate. Elias recognized him instantly, not from the canyon, from the town, from the ledgers, from the promises written in silver and broken in blood. The land speculator, the man who had bought the valley, the man who had hired the steel, the man who had burned the camps, the man who had started the war. The chief stepped forward, placed a hand on the bound man's shoulder, looked at Elias. You held the thread, you kept the path, you carried the weight. We return the debt, we bring the architect, we bring the fire, we surrender the judgment. To you silence fell, thick, heavy, unmoving. The wind shifted, carried the scent of dry pine and distant rain. The bound man swallowed. His breath came fast, shallow. He looked at Elias, looked for mercy, looked for anger, looked for anything he could use. Elias felt the old tension coil in his chest. Not fear, not hatred, recognition. This was not a battle, this was a reckoning. The tribe had done the hard work. They had tracked him, they had cornered him, they had dragged him through the dust and the dark. They had brought him to the edge of the man who had stood in the arch. They had handed him the knife. They had handed him the scale. They had handed him the choice. The chief did not look away. He did not soften, he spoke plain. You kept the word when the steel came. You kept the word when the fire fell. You kept the word when the ground broke. We do not forget, we do not forgive, but we do not decide. We bring the man, we bring the truth. You decide the end. The bound man fell to his knees, the dust rose. His voice cracked, please, I can pay, I have land, I have silver, I have deeds. I can give you the valley, I can give you everything, just let me walk. Just let me live. Elias looked at him, looked at the chief, looked at the warriors, looked at the riders waiting on the ridge, looked at the rug on the porch. He felt the weight of 3 years settle on his shoulders. He felt the weight of the promise. He felt the weight of the choice. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for his gun. He simply stepped down from the porch, walked into the yard, stopped 3 paces from the bound man, looked at the dust, looked at the sky, looked at the man on his knees. You bought the valley, you hired the steel, you burned the camps, you broke the line, you took the easy road, you forgot the weight. He paused. The wind moved through the grass, the silence held. I will not kill you, I will not sell you, I will not let you walk, I will take you to the town. I will lay the truth on the table, I will let the people see the architect, I will let them decide what justice means. The bound man's eyes widened. Hope, terror, confusion, you can't. They'll hang me, they'll burn me, they'll tear me apart. Maybe, Elias said, or maybe they'll learn. Maybe they'll see that land is not bought, it is borrowed. Maybe they'll see that steel does not build peace, it only delays it. Maybe they'll learn that a word is heavier than silver. The chief stepped closer. His voice was low, grounded, unshaken. You choose mercy, you choose law, you choose the long road. You do not choose revenge, you do not choose blood. You choose the harder path. Elias looked at him. I choose the promise. The chief studied him, long, quiet. Then he nodded. He turned to his warriors. They lowered their rifles. They stepped back. They mounted their horses. They did not look at the bound man. They looked at the sky, at the land, at the quiet truth of the valley. They rode away, not in triumph, not in defeat. In completion, the dust settled. The hoofbeats faded. The wind returned, cold, clean, clear. Elias stood in the yard, looked at the bound man, looked at the town in the distance, looked at the path ahead. He did not celebrate, he did not relax. He simply tied the rope to his saddle, mounted his horse, took the reins, and began to walk. The debt was paid, the thread held, the reckoning had only just begun. Dust rose from the main street, not from wind, from boots, from restless movement. The crowd gathered before the general store like water gathering at a break in a dam, men with rolled sleeves, calloused hands gripping hat brims, women with shawls pulled tight against the cooling evening air, eyes hard, shoulders tight. The air smelled of dry sage and nervous sweat. At the center of the open space, the speculator knelt in the dirt. Rough hemp bit into his wrists. His fine wool coat was torn at the shoulder. Grime and blood caked his jaw. He breathed in shallow, ragged pulls. He looked up, not at the sky, at the faces around him. He saw the camp survivors, the widows, the men who had buried their sons in shallow grave. He saw the weight of 3 years of greed pressing down on him. He opened his mouth. No words came, only a dry, cracking breath. Then the pleading began, low, desperate, broken. I can pay, I have deeds, I have silver in the bank. I can rebuild what was burned, just let me walk, just let me live. Marshal Vance stepped through the crowd, old leather creaked. His hat sat low. His eyes carried the flat, exhausted look of a man who had spent too long cleaning up other men's messes. He stopped beside Elias, looked at the bound man. Looked at the rope in Elias' hands. The town wants it done. His voice carried without shouting, cut through the murmurs, right here, right now, no paperwork, no delays, just the rope and the beam. He gestured toward the blacksmith's forge. A single iron hook hung from the crossbar. It had waited for cattle. It would wait for this. The crowd shifted. A murmur grew into a low, steady rhythm. Agreement, expectation, blood for blood, dust for dust. A woman near the front stepped forward. Her face was lined. Her hands were raw from digging. He took my husband, she said, flat, clear, unblinking. He hired the men who shot him in the back. He bought the water. He left us to drink mud. Give him to us. A man behind her nodded, raised a coil of hemp. Let the town judge. Let the town swing. Elias felt the rope burn into his palms. He did not let go. He looked at the speculator, saw the terror behind the greed, saw the man who had signed papers in warm rooms while families froze in the canyon, saw the architect of 100 broken promises. He felt the old tension coil in his chest, the familiar pull toward the easy road. The clean end, the quick shot, the rope. The crowd would cheer, the marshal would nod, the valley would breathe, it would feel like justice, it would taste like ash. He looked past the crowd toward the ridge. The chief stood at the edge of the street, still, silent, wrapped in woven wool. He did not step forward, he did not speak, he simply watched, waited, weighed. Elias knew what that silence meant. The tribe had done the hunting. They had tracked the man through broken stone and dry riverbeds. They had dragged him back. They had surrendered the judgment to a white man in a broken town. If Elias gave the crowd their rope, he would give them revenge. He would also break the fragile line holding the valley together. He would tell the chief that words meant nothing, that steel still ruled. That the promise was just a story told to dying men. He lowered his arms, dropped the end of the rope into the dirt, stepped forward, placed his body between the speculator and the crowd. The movement was slow, deliberate, unarmed. The murmurs sharpened, shoulders tensed, hands drifted toward coat pockets. Elias kept his voice low, grounded, unshaken. We do it by law or we do it by blood. We choose blood, we burn this valley again. Vance's jaw tightened. He took a half step closer. Law didn't stop his guns. Law didn't feed my kids. You think sitting around a table fixes a broken spine. I think it stops the next man from picking up a rifle, Elias said. He looked at the crowd, met their eyes. One by one, law is the only thing that holds when the heat breaks. The law is slow. It is ugly. It is painful, but it is the only thing that doesn't demand another life to pay for the last. A man near the back spat into the dust. Traitor. The word hung in the air, sharp, heavy. A woman echoed it. Sympathizer, you traded a horse for savages. Now you trade our justice for pride. Rocks hit the boardwalk. A man stepped forward, shoved Elias' shoulder. Hard. Elias didn't push back, absorbed the weight, kept his footing. He looked at the deputy. Take him inside, he said, quiet, firm. The deputy hesitated, looked at the crowd, looked at the marshal, looked at the iron hook. Then he unhooked the heavy brass key from his belt, stepped past the speculator, unlocked the jail door. The iron hinges groaned. The crowd didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as the bound man was dragged inside. The door shut, the bolt slid home. The sound echoed off the wooden walls, final, heavy. The crowd didn't leave, they gathered tighter, around the jail, around Elias, around the quiet space he had carved between them and their anger. The sun dipped below the ridge. Shadows stretched long across the hardpan. The air cooled. The tension did not break, it thickened. Torches appeared, not many, just a few, struck matches. Flickering orange light caught the edges of faces, lit the hard set of jaws. The marshal turned to Elias. His voice was low, carried only to the porch. They're not going home, he said. They want him. They want it done before dark. If you stand between them and that cell, you'll bleed. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. Elias didn't answer immediately. He walked to his cabin door. Stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under his boots. He sat on the edge, unslung his holster, checked the cylinder. 6 rounds, clean, oiled. He loaded them, one by one. The metallic clicks were soft, precise. He didn't look up, didn't flinch. He simply holstered the iron, looked at the jail, looked at the torches, looked at the darkening street. Let them come, he said. The marshal exhaled, a long, tired breath. He turned, walked away, didn't look back. Night fell like a heavy curtain. The street emptied of daylight, filled with shadows, with murmur, with the scrape of boots on gravel. The torches multiplied, not a mob, not yet, a gathering, a waiting. The speculator's voice came through the thin wooden walls of the jail, thin, panicked, scratching at the floorboards, pleading. Bargaining, praying, Elias stayed on the porch, kept his hands on his knees, kept his breathing slow, felt the cold seep through his coat, felt the weight of the valley pressing against his ribs. He had chosen the hard road. He knew what it cost. His name was mud on the wind. His porch would stay empty. His store would see fewer faces. His silence would be called cowardice. His patience would be called weakness. He accepted it. He had traded comfort for a line. He would hold it. Until it broke, or until the morning came. The first shout echoed off the tin roofs. Not a word, a sound, raw, angry, ready. Boots hit the boardwalk, fast, heavy. The torches flared. The crowd pressed forward, toward the jail, toward the door. Elias stood, didn't draw, didn't step down. Just stood in the porch shadow. Let them see him, let them see the line. The first man reached the steps, raised a pry bar, eyes wide, breath ragged. Behind him more came, shadows stretching, light flickering. The air smelled of smoke and sweat. The handle turned, the wood groaned, the first blow landed, splinters flew, dust plumed. Elias stepped down, placed his boots on the bottom step, raised his hands, empty, open, unarmed. You cross this line, he said, voice carrying over the noise. You burn it down, you start the fire that takes the whole valley, you do it over my body. The crowd hesitated. The pry bar lowered an inch, the torches wavered, the silence held, fragile, thin, ready to snap. Then a sound cut through the street, not a shout, not a curse, a slow, measured tread. Moccasins on wood, heavy, deliberate. The chief stepped from the shadows of the alley, entered the torchlight, stopped beside Elias, looked at the crowd, looked at the pry bar, looked at the jail door. He did not draw steel, he did not raise his voice. He simply stood, a marker, a line, a quiet reminder that the valley belonged to more than one kind of man. The crowd froze, the torches burned low, the night held its breath. The morning brought no gunfire, it brought a different kind of tension, heavy, slow. Unmoving, the jail stood, the door held, the speculator sat in the corner, silent, defeated. The town did not cheer, did not riot, they watched, waited, measured the cost of their anger against the weight of the chief's silence. Elias did not sleep. He sat on the porch until the sky lightened, until the dust settled, until the first horse whinnied in the distance. The marshal came at dawn, brought coffee, brought no words, left the tin cup on the step, walked away. The chief remained until midday, then he turned, nodded once, disappeared into the ridge. The line was held, not by steel, by stillness, by the quiet refusal to let the valley break. The tribunal did not happen in a courtroom. It happened under the cottonwoods near the dry creek bed. A long table of rough pine, settlers on one side, elders on the other. The speculator sat in the center, unbound, pale, eyes down. The wind moved through the leaves, carried the scent of damp earth and old ash. No gavels, no robes, just voices, slow, measured, painful. Elias sat at the head. Not as judge, as witness, as the man who had held the rope. The chief spoke first. His voice carried the weight of seasons. You took water, you took land, you took breath. You broke the line. You will not pay with death. You will pay with labor, with restitution, with exile from the valley floor. He will dig the irrigation ditches. He will rebuild the burned shelters. He will work until the debt matches the loss. Then he will leave, and he will not return. A murmur ran through the settlers. Not agreement, not yet. A man with a scarred cheek stood. He lost a brother. You ask us to let him walk. You ask us to watch him build what he burned. I ask you to watch him sweat for what he stole. Elias said, quiet, unflinching, I ask you to choose what kind of town we leave behind. The chief nodded. Slow, final, the elders spoke. The settlers answered. Voices overlapped, argued, yielded, returned. It took 3 days. It took 3 nights. It took coffee gone cold and bread gone stale. It took looking into the eyes of men who wanted blood and asking them to build a fence instead. When the judgment fell, it was not loud. It was not clean. It was binding. The speculator would work under shared watch, under tribal and settler guard, until the ditches ran, until the roofs held. Until the valley breathed without fear, then the road would open and he would walk it, alone. The cost was immediate. The town fractured, not into violence, into silence. Men who had tipped hats now turned their faces. Women who had left baskets at the door now kept their doors shut. The saloon grew quiet when Elias entered. The marshal stopped visiting the porch. The word spread fast. He chose them over us. He chose talk over truth. He chose a savage's law over our justice. Elias heard it, felt it, accepted it. He chopped wood until his hands blistered. He mended fences until the wire cut into his palms. He kept to the ridge, kept to the quiet, kept to the chair draped in faded wool. The rug stayed where he left it, unmoved, unfolded, catching the morning light. Catching the evening shadow, a silent ledger, a quiet witness. He did not defend his choice. He did not explain it. He simply lived it, every day, every season, every year, months passed, the drought broke, rain came, not in storms, in steady, patient falls, soaked the hardpan, fed the dry creek beds. Turned the dust to mud, then to grass, then to a fragile stubborn green. The speculator worked, under watch, under sun, his hands blistered, his back bent, his fine coat turned to rags. He dug the ditches, laid the stone, framed the shelters. He did not complain, he could not afford to. The valley watched him, not with hatred, with caution, with the slow, grinding realization that justice was not a single act. It was a daily wait. It was the sound of a shovel hitting rock. It was the sight of a proud man bending to lift water. It was the quiet understanding that blood did not fill the fields, sweat did. Trade began to return, not in grand markets, in small, careful exchanges. Settlers shared tools, tribes shared knowledge of the soil. Water rights were drawn on paper, signed by both hands, not perfectly, not without friction, but held. The valley shifted from dread to caution, from caution to routine, from routine to a fragile, hard-worn peace. Elias did not become a hero. He became a fixture, a quiet man on a high ridge, a steady hand in a shifting land. Men stopped calling him traitor, they called him nothing, which was better, which was peace. Women left baskets again, not with thanks, with respect. Children ran past his porch, chasing dogs. Chasing wind, chasing nothing at all. They did not fear the canyon, they did not fear the dark. They played where grave once stood, they laughed where silence once lived. The rug remained on the chair, faded further at the edges. The threads loosened, the patterns softened, but it held, it did not unravel. It simply aged, like the man who carried it, like the valley that kept it. He sat on the porch at dusk. The sun dipped below the ridge, painted the sky in bruised purple and slow gold. The wind moved through the grass, carried the scent of wet stone and distant wood smoke. He closed his eyes, felt the creak of the wood beneath him, felt the weight of the years, felt the quiet truth settle over his shoulders. He had not won a war, he had not conquered a valley. He had simply refused to let the dark dictate the law. He had chosen the long road, the hard road, the road that demanded everything and gave back only time. And time was enough. It was always enough. The chair creaked. The rug caught the last light. The wind shifted. The valley breathed. He opened his eyes. Watched the dark settle over the trees. Watched the first star pierce the fading blue. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply sat and kept the promise. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help this old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matter. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.